at 12 o'clock to bring you the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, as explained by Paramahansa Yogananda and edited by his direct disciple, Swami Kriyananda. And today we're on quatrain 72. There are only 75 of them, stanzas, and so this week we'll be coming to the end of the Rubaiyat, and then we will continue on at 12 o'clock on weekdays with some other offerings. I want to start by playing Swami Kriyananda singing this stanza and offering Yogananda's paraphrase.
Stanza 72. Alas, that spring should vanish with the rose, that youth's sweet-scented manuscript should close. The nightingale that in the branches sang, ah, hence and whither flown again, who knows? Paraphrase. To one who is enmeshed in outward consciousness, it seems pathetic that a young devotee should give up his freshly blooming worldly talents and fragrant sense enjoyments. Why, one asks, would someone in the very flower of youth renounce the roseate dreams and ambitions written so charmingly on the living pages of his brain, to voyage beyond the horizon toward uncharted shores? The true devotee, however, sees those dreams and ambitions as nothing but a demon dance of temptations performed daily in the temple garden of the mind. He who resolutely turns away from that noisy pantomime finds another, more inspiring entertainment awaiting him. The cosmic nightingale emerges from the darkness of the unknown, perches in the branches of his inner perceptions, and sings for his enjoyment songs of eternal wisdom. The devotee knows that wisdom, which fills with liquid song the tree lanes of his consciousness, has flown down from vast, unclouded skies of omniscience. He knows, too, that the wisdom perceptions of his soul will expand in time to embrace omnipresence. He knows because he knows.
This is a very important stanza in the Rubaiyat because it's something that everyone faces when they choose to walk the spiritual path. The spiritual path is not the same as walking any other path in life. In a way, it's a little bit like Theseus and the rope, the twine that he brought into the labyrinth in order to be able to find his way out. That same labyrinth exists for the spiritual life when we leave the material life behind, when we leave the life that promises material, not only material wealth, but material security and stability. This is a huge, huge challenge for most people on this planet. And so when we leave that seeming security behind us, and we take some steps, some tentative steps on the spiritual path, like the young devotee who is being talked about in this particular stanza, then if we get tugged by that material reality, meaning anything that's outside of us, the kingdom of heaven resides within. And if we're pulled in any way back outside to, oh, but I'm going to need that security, the quiet way sort of start to unravel and pull us back into that world. And the inner world becomes, well, it's as if a veil drops over us. And so I remember even living in a community with all devotees, all people practicing not just the spiritual path, but the same spiritual path that I was on. When my husband and I were young parents, there were, a number of families who looked to us. We were both working for Ananda on very, very small salaries. We had chosen to live a simple life and the spiritual life, and to put our practices, and including practicing karma yoga, ahead of any material gains. And some of them said to us very reasonably, well, what about your children's college education? Why, on those salaries, you'll never be able to save for that, and you're going to deny them the opportunity for college. Or they would say, well, what about your pension? There's no pension at Ananda. And what's going to happen in your old age and when you become a burden on others? And of course, those are all very reasonable concerns when we're living in the world of, the seeming material realities around us. But we knew even then, in our 20s, that living a life for God, living a life of faith, meant putting simplicity into action, because the spiritual life is a simple life. And it meant doing the practices, having the self-discipline to do these things, to see God in others as we're serving, and more to be aware of that divine presence as a reflection of the divinity that resides within us, being all around us, and not being concerned for anything for ourselves, and our children were an extension of ourselves, and living that life fully. It was very challenging to feel those thoughts, to hear those thoughts from others expressed to us. Challenging in some ways because we were young, but not challenging in other ways. It was not much different than our parents or relatives or our old friends or anyone else holding out to us potentially material dreams, or even material sense of responsibility, being responsible. And so those are the tests that come to the devotee, and that's why, he expresses it in this stanza. And we learn that by putting one foot in front of the other on the spiritual path, in faith, following that twine out of the labyrinth into the divine awareness, being part of our awareness more and more and more, that divine presence, that divine heart, that there lies the true treasure. A friend of mine was saying just yesterday to me that his wife's grandmother had a stroke. She's 100 years old. And I was reflecting on that in light of this stanza. That woman lives alone still. She's been taking care of herself all these years. She's never been a burden on anyone. And so who's to say that old age has to mean that we become a burden on anyone, even if we were ill and incapacitated? If we've lived a life for God, if we have lived a life, in other words, not for the self, but in ego transcendence, then people will want to be around us. They won't feel like they're taking care of us. They'll feel uplifted in our presence, as all of us felt in the later years of Swami Kriyananda's life, when it became harder and harder for him in the body. We were not concerned about, the burden. That thought never even crossed our mind. There was only blessing, because we felt a blessing of God in his presence. And so it is that living the life for God, we're never tempted by material outer realities. Ultimately, we recognize that the divine life is the inner life, and that is all that ultimately matters. Joy to you, and we'll see you again tomorrow at 12 o'clock.